you'll continue to see a lot more new users join crypto because of stablecoins and activity around that versus some of these other use cases. Not to say that GameFi won't onboard lots of users, just so far I think stablecoins have been the biggest source of new sort of users and new introductions to crypto.
It's Monday, July 8th, and this is Markets Daily, a show where we get into the minds of some of the most experienced and smartest investors, CEOs, analysts, founders, researchers, and anyone with a hot or smart take on the markets. Now, before we get into our discussion today, you know what we're going to do. We're going to take a look at what's going on in the news this morning. We saw a little bit of a crypto crash over the weekend. The CD20 index was down 7% and Bitcoin was in the red 5%. This morning, nearly all assets in the CD20 were flashing red, suffering even bigger losses than Bitcoin. Ether was down 5.8%, Sol down almost 8%, and XRP down 7%. Now, if we zoom out and take a look at macro events, Citi Research is predicting 8 Federal Reserve cuts starting in September through July next year. And bettors on Polymarket think that the Fed will have 1 to 2 rate cuts by the end of this year. Now, lastly, if we look at Bitcoin ETF investors in the United States, they were buying the dip on Friday. We saw inflows topping $140 million. Joining the show now to make sense of what's going on in the markets this morning is Switchboard co-founder Chris Hermida. Chris, good morning.
Hi, Jen. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks for being here. Now, like I mentioned just now, we saw a crash over the weekend. Make sense of this for us. What do you think drove the markets over the weekend leading up to this morning?
Yeah, so for starters, I tend to heavily discount the weekends. Most traders are out on vacation, especially, if you look at last week, you had the 4th of July, you had a European VC summer, as many people say, folks traveling for ECC, et cetera. So, I again, not to totally ignore moves on the weekend, but I think they should have lower weight, particularly depending on volumes, than stuff that happens during the week. But yeah, to your point, you had a continued sell-offs from both the Mt. Gox news as well as the German government, and sentiment is just re-rating lower. Everything changes on a whim, and it's for those that have been in crypto for a long time. You kind of get used to these sorts of sentiment changes.
Well, the Mt. Gox news has been the driver of selling pressure for probably about a week now. Talk to me about what you're watching there. Do we expect to see the price of Bitcoin go even lower?
Yeah, so it's unclear, so the Mt. Gox stuff has been, let's call it, known for a very long time. There were folks buying claims to Mt. Gox back in 2017 at, above fairly high levels, even in that era. So really, it's just a question of, the people that have been sitting on it, the claim buyers, folks that, have been waiting for these distributions for, call it, 10 years, what percentage of them are inclined to sell their holdings? And we'll see. I think, it's not necessarily clear to me that, you're going to see 50 or 100% of those folks immediately liquidate. That being said, there naturally will be some sellers. And I think that combined with what's been happening with the German government liquidating and just the overall sentiment around crypto in general at this particular moment hasn't been the best.
If you were to take a stab, make a prediction for us as to how many of the Mt. Gox claims holders might sell, do you have a prediction for us? And you don't have to. Sometimes I put people on the spot on this show, and I understand it might be hard to make a prediction on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, it's just tough to tell. But what I would say is, if you think of, so first off, I think the question is what percent was sold or resold the claims? And I think a large percentage of that what was resold, there are people that are traders that might want to take profits. But for those that were holding, you don't hold this for 10 years, and have convictions or the asset class that early to sell unless you really need to or you've changed your thoughts. So I suspect it'll probably be less than what people think in terms of those that did not sell their claims to financial institutions. But we'll see.
All right. Now, looking at the markets this morning, we're seeing a little bit of a bounce back from the numbers I mentioned at the top of the show, a little bit of a recovery happening now. If you were allocating a portfolio, what assets would you be looking at?
Yeah. So again, for legal reasons, we can't give price or financial advice. But, I think with your thinking as an allocator, like when I did back in the day with working with a lot of these folks, you primarily are targeting the most liquid large cap assets, right? The Bitcoins, the East of the world, and to a lesser extent, Sol and other, quote unquote blue chips within crypto. So I think, you're seeing more of that take the attention. And I think that, there's been a lot of negative sentiment recently, particularly around alts. That's not to say that it can't or won't change. That's just sort of where things have been recently.
Let's talk a little bit more about alts. What do you think's driving the negative sentiment around alts? Do you think that that will recover by the end of the year? How do you expect to see the alt sector perform?
Yeah. So again, without going into specifics around any single names, you're seeing a lot more sellers and a lot more supply hitting the market than there is demand. And right now, the let's call it a lot of the inflows have primarily been focused on, let's say, large cap assets. The Bitcoins, the souls of the world, and to a lesser extent, from a retail perspective, meme coins. So again, from where the attention is and where you've seen activity, trading, inflows, outflow, even outflows in some cases, right? It's primarily been focused on large caps and meme coins and less so on a lot of the new launches or alts.
Now, I want to talk about ETFs because we had the Bitcoin ETF approval in January. We are all waiting for the ETH ETF to hit the market. Some thought that we would have seen ETH ETFs trading in the United States by now, but we haven't seen that happen just yet. Is that something you're closely watching? And do you think that ETH is going to react the same way to the news that Bitcoin did at the beginning of the year?
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I think people are definitely expecting it to be something similar in the sense that, they're expecting the ETH ETF to be a hit, to launch and have inflows. But we'll see, right? Again, a lot of it is it's not clear that the demand is going to be there given the way things have been trading. But, most people remain optimistic, and given what we saw with the Bitcoin ETF, right? Even if that recreates itself to some percent or to some extent on ETH, it's going to be positive for the space.
Tell me a little bit more about what you mean there when you say it's not clear that the demand is going to be there for the ETH ETF, because a lot of research firms have come out, a lot of asset managers have come out and said we're going to see billions of dollars flow into these products when they hit the market.
For sure. So again, not financial advice. My personal opinion is we will see, a large amount of demand, but again, to what extent, right? You kind of had a lot of people banking on the ETH ETF thesis over the past 6 months. And again, it remains to be seen what are day one inflows going to look like, right? Are you going to see $10 billion day one? Who knows? That'd be a lot, but I mean, again, if you compare it to what you saw with BTC, I think the rational expectation, the rational thing to, expectation around it would probably be some percentage less than what you saw with Bitcoin. It's just a question of what is that going to actually look like on day one, right? Or week one.
Now, given your background, I want to turn to the DeFi sector. We don't always get to talk about DeFi on this show, but if you're looking at what's going on in DeFi and you're comparing it to what's happening, with Bitcoin, with Ether, with the ETFs, what's going on there? Is it following a similar trajectory?
So I think, going into the cycle, a lot of investors, had the opinion that let's call it alts and everything around that would be beta, let's say, to Bitcoin, ETH, and some of the large caps. What we're seeing is dispersion and basically stuff that's non-correlated to, or less correlated, better said, to what's happening with the large caps. So, meme coins sort of exist in their own land. And I think from our perspective, what we're seeing is, we're tracking on-chain launches, we're tracking transaction activity, we're tracking a lot of other things. And you can use that, I think, as a bit of a barometer around that. How many coins are launching on a given day on pump.fun, right? Things like that are actually pretty interesting and useful and novel metrics to track. And it has been trending down over the past week, but again, you can't really use 1 week as an example, right? If you zoom out in the broader context, activity has just exploded over the past 6 months.
What do you think is driving that explosion of activity?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is for meme coins in particular, right? A lot of it's speculation, but it's also excitement, it's hype. You see, lots of folks launching their own communities and their own coins, kind of similar to what you saw in the NFT era back in 21 and 22. So, again, we'll see what happens as it matures, but I think that meme coins are here to stay. And again, it's not just about looking at the large caps or large cap meme coins. It's also looking at what's been happening on the margin with new launches and hype around new things.
Now, you talk about this speculation, and I know people who watch the show know I love a good meme coin. I think they're super fun. But what do you think it tells us about the market, if anything, that there has been so much interest in these speculative meme coins over the past, let's say, 6 months?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is they're easy to understand, and for a lot of folks, it's fun, right? And comparing to the other narratives, it's an appealing narrative to a lot of people that are in the ecosystem, not just the speculators and the builders, but it appeals to a much broader audience of people that may not have otherwise been exposed to crypto, but now have some way to feel like they can partake in it, and it feels fun to them. Um, Now, is it sustainable? We'll see. But I think, on the net, right, meme coins do bring in and attract a new crowd to crypto. And the hope is that maybe they come for the memes, they stay for all the other benefits of it.
I like that. Come for the memes. Now, I want to talk about maybe specific sectors
Mhm.
of DeFi, specifically AI tokens and GameFi.
Mhm.
We've talked about that on the show in the past couple of weeks. We've taken a look at some data that says, despite what's happening in the DeFi sector, AI tokens and GameFi are seeing increasing interest from investors for different reasons. Have you noticed that when you're looking at the data that you're tracking?
Yeah, I mean, I think AI for sure has had a ton of excitement and hype. And there's a lot of people interested in that. Again, I think what you're seeing on sort of traditional Web 2, all the interest around AI, everybody's looking for additional ways to incorporate crypto into that. So whether it's decentralized compute or inference, or sort of more on the data side, plays that folks are working on, there's a lot of hype and excitement around that, that kind of transcends all the other market sentiment that you're seeing. So I think we'll continue to see more people building and active there.
Any AI crypto projects that are interesting to you?
Again, I can't name single names, but there's a lot that are exciting. I think for me personally, the most interesting is probably decentralized inference. So there's quite a few protocols working on that. And yeah, I mean, the other sort of side of it is decentralized data, and in particular, this concept that whether it's with DeepIn, whether it's with other applications, you can sell your own data, build a much better training data set, and that can be used to ultimately make better models than what you see sort of from the Web 2 giants. We'll see though.
And the second sector I wanted to ask you about is GameFi. And at CoinDesk, we are in a GameFi theme week. And so wanted to get your perspective there. We're seeing a lot of Web3 gaming projects launching tokens.
Mhm.
We're seeing more layer twos pop up that are supporting gaming and GameFi. What do you see the trajectory of that sector looking like?
Yeah, so I mean, GameFi as a whole, and just games in general, are hit driven businesses. The best games in any market, it does not matter, will perform well. Just like, by the way, the best movies will perform well whenever they're released. So we'll think of it from that context of, it's less about GameFi as a sector and more about interest in specific games and things that people are really excited about. Now, I'm excited for what hopefully will be the massive Web3 breakout game beyond just what you see right now, that gets lots of sort of new users and onboards new users to crypto, the same way you kind of see that with meme coins. Hopefully you'll see it with GameFi as well.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. You said that meme coins are bringing a new audience to crypto who are coming for the memes or the fun. Similarly, GameFi, it sounds like you're saying that about, and AI tokens. Is there one specific, I guess, part of the crypto world that you think is going to bring those next million or billion users to the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now, if the people the meme coin, or what better said, a lot of the crowd the meme coins are attracting are also the folks that would likely also be playing, right, many of these games. So without narrowing it down to any one, it's kind of two sides of the same coin, right? It's, you want to use crypto to have fun, or do things that, join a new community, have a new perspective, et cetera, et cetera. And that's different than what you see with sort of AI, deep in another infra, right, which is trying to accomplish, a particular use case. So they're just different crowds. I think right now the answer is probably neither out of any of those sectors in terms of onboarding, more folks. The best onboarding tool, I think, to date in crypto has been stablecoins. And to do not to do a curveball, but I think you'll continue to see a lot more new users join crypto because of stablecoins and activity around that. versus some of these other use cases. Not to say that GameFi won't onboard lots of users, just so far I think stablecoins have been the biggest source of new sort of users and new introductions to crypto.
It's interesting you bring up stable coins. I think when we talk about crypto, we often have a very North American focus.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that we try and break that. But when you say stable coins will bring a bigger and newer audience to crypto, I assume that you're talking about outside of North America. Now, I've asked a few people on this show in the past weeks, what they think the killer use case for stablecoins will be. What do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, I think to date it's been payments, and particularly in a lot of areas where payment systems have been really difficult. It just makes sense. It's a great product, and I think even in the West, you still see a lot of people that are now using stablecoins for peer-to-peer payments. And there's been a lot of folks working on that, building really great products around it. But I think from just a onboarding perspective, the number of people that this is the potential to onboard, everybody needs a wallet, everybody needs a bank account. Not everybody needs a video game.
That's true, and I was wrong to assume that you were speaking about outside of North America. Tell me more about.
It is more from account perspective, but it's just we're seeing adoption everywhere, right? Even if it's more in certain regions.
Tell me a little bit more about that use case when you're talking about peer-to-peer payments. Specifically, what are you talking about? Are you talking about maybe folks who are on Shopify or doing e-commerce using stable coins? Are you talking about remittances? What does that look like to you?
I mean, for me, I put it in broadly in just payments as a category. I lump everything into it, but I think the areas where you've seen the most growth have been peer-to-peer payments in developing countries, to your earlier point, followed by what I think will be more and more service providers accepting stablecoins for their own operations. I mean, if you've ever tried to send an international wire, it's a pain, particularly to regions that don't have, great sort of USD correspondent banking. So in those regions, stablecoins are just a 10x better product.
And now I have to ask you, because I know that you previously did some work at Circle. We learned last week that Circle was the first stablecoin issuer to be licensed under the MiCA regulations in Europe. Is there any particular region that you think is making big waves when it comes to stablecoin regulation right now? Any particular region that you think we're going to see people uptake the product more than others?
Yeah, no, great question. Again, I can't comment on for Circle, but very excited to see that they've received approval for it, and see more both USDC and EURC adoption across the region. I think from a where it's interesting perspective, I think for better or for worse, some of the work that is being done in the U.S. around CBDCs is pretty interesting, right? If you are able to, whether it's a first party sort of Federal Reserve or whether it's through private institutions such as Circle. I think the idea that you have stablecoin first rails in large developed countries is really cool and exciting. So whether you actually see regs pass in the U.S. around that or in other nations, I think the countries that adopt stablecoin infrastructure the fastest will have the most to gain from it.
Do you think, I guess in that example you just gave, are CBDCs and stablecoins almost one and the same in the future that you envision for stablecoins?
Not quite, right? I think there's a bit of nuance, but for purposes of just building stablecoin first infrastructure, it has similar ramifications. And the example I would give is if you can pay, for example, let's say your taxes in stablecoins, does it really matter if it's a CBDC or if it's, say, USDC? I think the end user isn't really going to care as much about that distinction versus sort of crypto natives. We care about the distinction, as do many others. But for purposes of it, I think it's more just about the adoption and seeing those rails be implemented more and more in our day-to-day lives.
I would love if I could pay my taxes in stable coins and the government could just see all of the transactions and take the taxes, and I wouldn't get the anxiety that I get every tax season. I think that's the use case that is most exciting to me, Chris.
Well, if they accept it for that, think about what else we'll be accepting at that point.
Chris, thank you so much for joining the show this morning. It was a pleasure.